Principal Matters Podcast, episode 461. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. And this week, we're going to be talking about supporting new teachers with my special guests. I mean, this is an all-star cast right here. Jenn David-Lang and Kim Marshall. If you don't know them, then step up, because it's time to get to know both of them. Kim Marshall is a veteran educator, well-known writer for his work on teacher development, leadership, school improvement. After 32 years in the Boston Public Schools area as a teacher, principal, central office leader, he began his writing and consulting work, and he's best known for the Marshall Memo, a weekly summary of important research and ideas for educators. And he's known for his work on teacher supervision and evaluation. Kim is the go-to guy to help educators stay informed, inspired, and focused on what matters most for school success. And Jenn David-Lang, this is like the dynamic duo. She's the experienced writer, educator, professional learning facilitator, known for her research on accessible and actionable education. You're just a curator is what I like to call you, Jenn. You're the founder of The Main Idea, the monthly summary of essential education books for busy leaders. With her background in teaching, leadership, and coaching, she combines deep knowledge with practical insights for school improvement, and her mission is to empower educators with the tools and ideas they need for clarity and purpose. They're the authors together of two books, The Best of the Marshall Memo, book 1 and 2, Ideas and Action Steps to Energize Leadership, Teaching, and Learning. And they've received a grant to upload the chapters of those books to a website to offer these materials for free. So welcome back, guys, to the podcast. It's been I'd have to look it up. It's been a while since I've brought you in. And for listeners, why don't you tell them a little bit about the website and the materials you guys have been working on, and anything else you want to add to that intro?
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. What a warm welcome. And it's lovely to be here with you. We saw you last in person at a conference, so that's so nice to see you again. Kim and I worked really hard. He has been running the Marshall Memo for over 20 years. And we thought, but each week when he produces the Marshall Memo, it's just a collection of different best of articles. So he had the idea, what if we go through over 8,000 article summaries on his website and organize them choose the best ones by theme? You know, what are the top 10, 20 topics that school leaders care about, and choose the top 10 to 15 articles for each one. Wow. And so we put together 2 books based on this, and then we got a grant to upload all of these chapters to the website, which not only makes it free, but it means that we can continually add new chapters, it's the wrong word, installments to the website for all of you. So our next one, which is going up hopefully in the next few weeks to month, is on supporting new teachers. So we have chosen the top 15 articles out of thousands on supporting new teachers and organize them for you.
Well, it's so exciting. Go ahead, Kim.
The huge advantage that we have with this is we can look over multiple years, like 18, 19 years of articles, and pick the very, very best one. So this is really different from an issue of Ed Leadership or Ed Week or something that has good articles, very solid articles, but we have much more scope in looking over time and finding and curating and organizing and arranging and introducing articles that really just hit home, with the very, very best writing and thinking for, 2 decades.
Well, the joy of what you guys are doing, first of all, I just have to stop for Principal Matters listeners and set some more context. So Jenn mentioned that we got to see each other in Miami at the National SAM Innovation Conference with our great friend, Mark Schillinger. So it was so fun to see both of you there. And you guys were presenting, like I was, to leaders on the work that they're doing in education. Kim, you are such a legacy in education, and your Marshall Memo has been something that leaders have turned to forever. And Jenn, the same thing with The Main Idea. I mean, you guys together are when I say a power duo, I'm not just being complimentary or I'm being serious, that you guys have really done such a beautiful job of just consistently grabbing the best resources, the best research, the best practical ideas for educators to be looking at. And now with this opportunity to be able to take some of that same information, place it back on your website in categories, it's exciting. And you gave me the access to looking at the 15 different articles that you pulled for supporting new teachers. And I thought it would just be really fun to take some time and just share some of the things you guys have learned from your own resources as you're pouring through these. But before we go there, what else would you like to add to, so listeners know if they're interested in the work that you guys do, what are some other things you're both involved in that folks should have on their radar?
Well, first we should give you the website, right? So in case people want the actual website, it's bestofmarshallmemo.org. And we have article collections on topics, everything from time management and school climate and trust to coaching teachers, professional learning, results-focused teams, and content area. We have mathematics, we have differentiation. So there's a lot of topics there you can look at bestofmarshallmemo.org. And then, yeah, Kim and I do lots of other work. Go ahead, you go first, Kim.
Well, just a couple of interesting facts about this. So when I first had this idea and Jen and I thought about it, we thought it would actually be easy. We would just go to the archive, and I've already sort of organized things by topic, and I've even every week I decide which of the one perhaps article of that week's collection that is a classic that's super. So I thought it'd be easy. We'd just go in and pick the classics, and the book would write itself. Turned out it was a lot harder, and one of Jen's huge contributions was she's really good at organizing things. So here are these, we want to do these 12 articles. What areas do they fall into? But the other thing I want to say is you mentioned the books, the books that were published. This was our big pandemic project. It was a big deal to get these. It was 2 years of work to get these books published. And they didn't do well at all because this format, a hard copy 400-page book, each one is 400 pages, was just not conducive to a principal saying, okay, I like this topic. So now I have to slap it on a Xerox machine and copy a 20-page article. So that was just not going to fly. And we were kind of stuck. The books were selling a little bit, but they really weren't getting out there. And so that's when this foundation got in touch with us. And we, after a lot of back and forth, we came up with this idea, let's just put the content and with recordings. So there's a professional recording of each one of these topics, which is kind of cool. So super accessible. And right along at the beginning, we made the decision, no password, no login. You just click, you're there, and you click, and there are the articles.
Wow, what a resource. Jen, you wanted to add something to that?
No. And then, Kim and I, every once in a while, we provide a free chapter chat, we call it. So we have a couple of dates. We're doing 2 chapter chats on supporting new teachers. It's free. It's just an hour with us. It's not us talking at you. It's an interactive opportunity to, we jigsaw the readings from the chapter and we do some thinking about it and we help you think through how could you bring these ideas to your school. At the end of each chapter, I wrote professional learning suggestions so that you could take these ideas and do a workshop in your school.
I love that. So let me share an anecdote as a way to set up a point that I'd like to make. So I was, last year was doing my annual physical at my doctor's and explained to him, my family has a history of heart disease. I don't have any trouble right now. But he was saying to me, well, with your history of family's heart disease, he said, you probably have heard conflicting information about taking a daily aspirin. He's like, for years, we've told people just take a daily aspirin. It kind of reduces the chances for blood clotting, et cetera. And then there was research that showed that, well, actually, that may not be as helpful as we think, especially in people over the age of 70. He said, but you're 55 at the time. So I think you should start taking daily aspirin because the research shows that at your age, it could actually be more beneficial. But when you're older, we could taper you off. And I was listening to him and I was thinking later about this. I was like, in education, we sometimes we're doing practices that have been the same for a really long time, and we haven't checked out the research lately to see if it should be changing. And when I read the things you two are publishing, I feel like for a practitioner, it's just a chance to tell me what works and what the research says. And so when I was looking over even the supporting new teachers, it was like, this is the part that's hard for me to explain, and this is gonna be a mixed metaphor, but it's kind of like sitting down to a meal and every option is really good. And it's like, so you don't even know where to begin, like with this. So I think, Kim, when you said your book didn't sell, quote unquote, really well the first time, I'm thinking, well, that book is a resource though. If you're sitting down to read it like a novel, if you're sitting down to read it like teach me one thing, you picked the wrong book. But if you're looking for like, what is the research says actually works in school, then these are the resources right here. So having said that, I just would love to pick your brains a little bit about some of the resources you guys have uncovered that you include here in supporting new teachers. And we can go a lot of directions with this, but I think that one of the things you talk about is effective induction programs. So can you talk a little bit about what some effective schools are doing when it comes to induction with new teachers?
So one of the articles is the second article actually in the book is about a program that's about a mile away from me, right here in Brookline. Brookline High School, Margaret Metzger and Gail Davis did this program, this induction program, because at that point, this large high school where both of my children went, was bringing in 25 new teachers a year. And they developed this program and they figured out how to do this. And they had fantastic luck well, not luck, success at keeping teachers rather than people flaming out in the middle of the year or getting discouraged or getting an ulcer or all those other things that happened, in the first year of teaching, including mine. Back in 1969. So that's an example of an article that was not a research article. It was not in a hardcore journal of any kind. It was in Edge magazine, which actually has gone out of business. As Kaplan used to do this. But it just struck me as so concrete and such good ideas. But there are other articles, in this chapter that are, that are researchy type of things. So we have everything in between the very practical, on the ground practitioners inventing stuff, and then researchers after years and like Susan Moore Johnson, Harvard professor, and John Papay and at Brown, years and years of research on professional working conditions. So we have everything on that whole continuum.
And I want to step back for a moment too, to say, why did we decide to add supporting new teachers? And I think there are some startling statistics from the collection. First of all, is that 20 to 40% of your newest teachers are going to leave within the first 5 years, and 11% on average, of course, of your first year teachers will leave by the end of the year. So, at this moment in time when we're recording this, there's a big problem with retention of teachers. We're all looking for good teachers. And so the best place to start is let's start at the very beginning, Julie Andrews, with what are we doing to prepare new teachers? And another statistic I read, not from our articles, but from a recent book by Harry and Rosemary Wong on new teachers, they found that 50% of teachers receive no induction at all. 50%. So between those three statistics, that's sort of why we thought this is a good time to talk about this. Yeah, did you want to add, Will?
Anytime that I address an audience of educators, I always ask, how many of you had a rough first year? And usually 3/4 of the hands go up. And so I think it is touch and go, whether people survive their opening year of teaching. And so this is where the mentoring and the induction programs and the support and all these other things that we'll talk about come in.
There was a startling, and I didn't put this in my notes, but when I was reading through some of the research findings, something else that stood out to me, and Kim, you may want to speak to this, or Jen, but was that there's a false assumption that leaders often make that a teacher will just get better. They'll just get better with experience. And I can't remember which of the articles it was that was just talking about that. I mean, it works in classrooms. It should work for teacher preparation too. People don't just get better because we hope they do. We have to create the systems in which we need to support them in getting better. And I know this episode is going to come out as some schools are already in, and some schools maybe just beginning. And so maybe we could take a few minutes to talk about some of the feedback from. I know that there's a part of the book that just talks about key skills for the first 90 days. I'm just curious, what are some of those things that you guys would want to keep on the radar of leaders for those first 90 days of school?
Well, the article you're referring to is the Paul Bambrick-Santoyo article, right? So yeah, there's different parts, and we should get back and we should outline some of the elements of effective induction programs. I don't know that we fully answered that first question, but your second question, I think, in focusing on the first 90 days, Paul Bambrick-Santoyo wrote one of the articles in our collection, and it's based on his book. He actually has a book called Get Better Faster, and it is about those first 90 days. And he says that, with some of the training he does, his teachers can improve as much in 1 year as most typical teachers take 20 years to improve. And so for isolating those first 90 days, he talks about 2 tracks that we need to help support them with the classroom management skills and the rigor skills. it's a misconception that you want to get the classroom management down and then do you hit the rigor. No, he says both. And he has deadlines, September 30th, October 30th, and he really lays them out, including some of the skills that many of us know from Doug Lemov's work. So, he talks about classroom management, first working on routines and procedures, and then strong teacher voice, and then redirecting student behavior. But then at the same time, you're working on the rigor skills. How do you write a rigorous lesson plan, right? How do you check for understanding? How do you use data-driven instruction? So I think those are some of the ideas from this particular article, if you're interested in reading more about that. Yeah.
Now, the articles don't always completely agree. So, for example, the Margaret Metzger Gail Davis article says the very first thing is, where's the Xerox machine? Like when do I get paid? Very concrete kind of things before the year begins. By the way, back to your thought about a lot of teachers don't get support and so forth, and we think teachers are going to get better. That thought has a brother, which is, if you don't get better, you don't deserve to stay. And, I remember very clearly as a first grade teacher, people looking at me and saying, well, he's just not going to make it. He's just not cut out for this business. And so let him sink or swim, and probably sink. So I think that is in the background of the neglect of new teachers a lot of the time.
Yeah, and we assume that, whatever they did in their teacher training program, that was enough.
Right.
And, even I read that, Domino's trains their pizza delivery guys for 9 days before they go out, right? And we are often guilty of one and done, right? Bring the new teachers in for 1 day before school, right? Give them their keys, their password, hand them the curriculum. Not many of us, but some people don't realize how important it is to really think about what are the elements that will make teacher induction successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that. And Kim, you're right. I remember years ago, our son Jack was it was a long story about a hospital emergency, but I was at the hospital with my son for several days, watching the staff work, watching the nurses, doctors work. And I went down to find some coffee, and I saw a hospital administrator coming down the hall, and he had a checklist, and he had all these people with him. And I'm just laughing, Kim, because the first place he stopped was the room with the Xerox machine. he was like, I just want to show you guys where we make copies when we're doing. And I just laughed out loud. But then I thought in my head, have I ever showed my new teachers where the Xerox machines are? Like, how much time we could save by answering the questions in advance that people have? We do that for kids. Why don't we do that for teachers too? Anything else that you want to add about induction, or even that critical first 90 days?
Well,
so another thing is that, we deal with classroom management, but not at great length in this chapter. But there is a whole other chapter or section of the Best of Marshall Memo on positive discipline, on classroom management. And so if you want to go into more depth, you can go to another part of this website.
I was just going to add, it's not just the nuts and bolts of where's the copier, but it's also sometimes when we bring new teachers in, we train them on all the latest, technology and pedagogy, but that we don't start from the beginning. So they really need help with real basics of classroom management, as Kim says, lesson planning, pedagogy. And so, some of the elements of effective induction, they talk about giving them an opportunity to observe veteran teachers. Making sure they have administrator support, are the leaders, is the principal communicating with them, visiting their classes very early on, giving them early praise. Can we do any type of workload reduction so they don't have perhaps as many students or maybe an additional prep? Is the coaching that we provide for them, is it tailored to what they need, meaning someone who's good with a first year teacher and knows how to get back to those basics of classroom management? And then do we have something like, do we connect them with each other? I think it was also in that Davis Metzger article about having monthly meetings with the new teachers. I would say bi-weekly even, tap a teacher leader and get them together, sure, to talk about lesson planning and pedagogy, but also just what are the challenges you're dealing with, and just having other people who are in the same boat as you are, right? I think many of us are close with the teachers we started with. You remember that cohort and that experience. And just building collaboration. They need to feel welcomed and connected to the school, whether that's collaboration with other new teachers or veteran teachers. But those are some of the elements that the articles have talked about.
Just to step back and talk about the structure of this set of articles here, because it's not just a list of articles. The first section is induction and professional working conditions. So that's what the school leadership team needs to put in place, an organized induction process and creating the working conditions where a newbie coming in can survive. And the second one is the issue of burnout. And so there are 4 articles in this section about the specifics of what it looks like, what the symptoms are, and what, again, this is more from the leadership point of view, what people can put in place. And the third section is really directed at teachers, how teachers can build self-efficacy and resilience. And this has several stories, and I think, Will, you expressed interest in a couple of these articles here about people who almost failed their first year, who almost cried in the middle of a class, And so how do you prevent that? And then the last section is just very, very nuts and bolts. So the first 2 are for administrators in the school, the first 2 sections, and then the last 2 sections are really directed directly at teachers, although it might be administrators giving it to them and saying, here, read this.
I love that. Well, here's what I want to do right now for Principal Matters listeners. I have one other question that I want to ask, and then I'm going to actually keep you guys in the room because I want to record a follow-up session to this one so that Principal Matters listeners get 2 weeks of Jenn and Kim. And so, because there's so much here that I want to get to that I'm not going to get to in just one session. So before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about the teacher burnout, because there's some pretty startling feedback from teachers on why they leave schools. Can you talk about that for a little bit of what some of the research says about some of the most predominant reasons that teachers don't stay?
Well, this is scary, but in Michelle Dowdy's article, the number 1 reason teachers don't stay, school leadership. It's us. We got to hold up a mirror, right? Are we creating the kinds of conditions for, and not just new teachers, but for all teachers to stay? Like, right? Are we creating a culture where people feel safe and supported? Are we effectively dealing with student behavior so that there's a consistent approach across the school? Do we have a vision? Are we supporting and appreciating our teachers? So the first thing to do is to hold up the mirror, which is not always easy to do. One reason why they might be burning out or leaving. Then, of course, Kim's area, teacher evaluation system, which we may not have a lot of control over what that system is, but how we implement it can impact whether they stay. Excessive workload, again, workloads may be set, but there may be some ways to help with a co-teacher, a paraprofessional, or something like that. There certainly are personal reasons that have nothing to do with us. A partner gets a job in Oklahoma, you can't do anything about that. And then really the strange thing is student behavior. Some teachers leave because their administrators are not dealing with student behavior and it's getting out of control. And some teachers leave because the administrators are too strict and they don't believe the way the administrators are addressing and dealing with students is something that they believe in and they support. So those are some of the reasons. Go ahead, Kim.
Well, back to the issue of teacher evaluation. So I just came from a conference in downtown Boston, and I was sitting next to a principal from Rhode Island. And she said they have the same old dreary teacher evaluation system once a year. The teacher puts on a special show and it's formal sort of Danielson scoring on the thing. And she said what she's doing is trying to work around that so that she can get into classrooms more frequently and give teachers more coaching advice. And she thinks she can do that. And I know principals who've been able to, and I was like this when I was a principal in Boston, working around the system and just getting out of the office and getting into classrooms and watching a little bit of stuff and then giving teachers very concrete feedback and dealing with sometimes teachers have an attitude problem. Like I definitely had an attitude problem when I started teaching, that setting up routines was Mickey Mouse. That just wasn't what I did. It wasn't who I was. I was a really good teacher. I was a charismatic teacher who would sort of bring kids together. And somebody really needed to pull me aside and says, Kim, Kim, if you just put in a little work on these routines, you won't be losing your temper all the time. You won't be going home and, crying to your wife about how horrible things are and how horrible these kids are. So get it together, Kim. Sometimes you just have to have a stern kind of come to Jesus meeting with teachers and get them to do the things that are necessary to reduce the stress. And Harry Wong is terrific on this, and also Doug Lamov, and just the concrete advice of how you get a classroom to run smoothly.
And I want to share the flip side of that also and leave your listeners with a very concrete piece of advice. Melissa Wu's article in this collection talks about how we as leaders put too little effort into retaining our high performing teachers. And it could be your new teachers. You could see a lot of promise there. And, she has this heartbreaking quote of a high-performing teacher who leaves her school, and she basically says, if the principal had just asked me to stay, I probably would have stayed. And so,
if he said, what would it take to get you to stay? That's what it would have done.
yeah. And so, regardless of what time of year this podcast comes out, it's useful for leaders to conduct stay interviews where you go to your high performing teachers and you ask them, what will it take for you to stay, and convey the message that you want them to stay. And we're focusing on new teachers here. And so the interesting thing is usually people do stay interviews like in the spring. With new teachers, it's likely best to do that in the fall in the United States, October, November, because obviously they're not a high-performing teacher within a month or two, but you see the promise, and so you want to say, what can I do to help you to stay before it's too late, and then actually do something about it so that they don't become part of that statistic of 11% of teachers who leave by the end of the first year.
I love it. Well, Principal Matters listeners, the website is bestofmarshallmemo.org. We'll put that in the show notes, but if you want access to one of the newest chapters that will be there available for you on supporting new teachers, where you can learn about induction, professional working conditions, preventing burnout, how teachers can build self-efficacy and resilience, practical tips for rookies, all that is there and more. And Jenn and Kim, I know you're going to stay around so that we can do an additional session, but until next time, thank you so much for these wonderful resources for listeners, and Principal Matters listeners. Thank you for doing what matters, and we'll talk to you again soon.